Eddard Stark, commonly called Ned, was the second-born child to Lord Rickard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, and Lyanna Stark in 263 AC. He had 3 other siblings, an older brother, Brandon, born a year before him, Lyanna, born around 266 AC, and Benjen, born after 266 AC. Shorter and plainer in the face than his older brother Brandon, Ned had the typical features of a Stark: gray eyes, dark hair, and a long face. His eyes were known to change colors with his mood, ranging from soft as fog to hard as stone. If you were his enemy, you were likely to see cold eyes. Others have remarked that ice water flows through his veins, and that Ned had a frozen heart. Some felt that his reserved demeanor was a sign of coldness and disdain. But for those that truly knew him, they understood that despite Ned's solemn face, he had a good, sweet heart, and was a man fiercely protective of his children and wife. But even if he was regarded as cold, many more called him honest, brave, proud, stubborn, and loyal. His sense of honor and justice were unwavering. Like most Northerners, Ned followed the old gods and considered the weirwood and the godswood to be the heart of Winterfell. Ned grew up at Winterfell alongside his siblings. At the age of 8, in about 271 AC, his father sent him to the Eyrie to be fostered by Lord Jon Arryn. There he met Robert Baratheon, and the two boys would grow very close. Ned brought caution to Robert's boldness. They also grew close to Lord Arryn, considering him a second father. By the age of 16, Ned was splitting his time between the Eyrie and Winterfell. On one of these visits, he presented a marriage proposal from his friend Robert to his father, who asked to marry Lyanna. Ned's father agreed, but later Lyanna expressed she wasn't so sure about her newly betrothed. Lyanna had heard of Robert's lust, and she believed he would never keep to one bed, telling Ned, "Love is sweet, dearest Ned, but it cannot change a man's nature." As Ned had held the bastard child Robert had in the Vale, he couldn't deny that she could be right. In 281 AC, at the age of 18, Ned attended the tourney at Harrenhal with his siblings and close friend Robert Baratheon. While at the tournament, Ned had desired to dance with Ashara Dane, but being too shy to ask her himself, his brother instead asked for him. Ned would also meet Howland Reed at the tourney after his sister Lyanna saved him from some squires. Howland and Ned would develop a friendship that lasted for the rest of Ned's life. According to many, the tournament was splendid, until the last day of competition. After Rhaegar Targaryen, the crown prince and son of Aerys II Targaryen, defeated his last opponent, the prince rode past his own wife, Ilya Martell, and crowned Ned's sister Lyanna the Queen of Love and Beauty, placing a garland of blue roses in her lap with the tip of his lance. Ned's older brother Brandon took this as a slight on his sister's honor, who was betrothed to Robert Baratheon, and had to be restrained from confronting Rhaegar. Ned reacted to Rhaegar's action in a much calmer way, but the maesters state that he was no more pleased than his brother Brandon. After the tournament, Ned continued spending his time between the Eyrie and Winterfell, but about a year after the tourney, he was in the Vale when his sister Lyanna was abducted by Rhaegar Targaryen, and his brother Brandon and father Rickard were killed by Aerys II. After Rickard and Brandon were dead, Aerys II commanded Lord Arryn to execute his former wards, Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark. Lord Arryn refused, and called his banners in the defense of justice. This began Robert's rebellion. As sides were quickly taken between the loyalists to the crown and those rebelling, Ned Stark desperately needed to get back to the north, where he had become warden with the deaths of his father and brother. Once in the north, he could call his bannermen and aid Jon Arryn and his friend Robert Baratheon. There's a lot that occurred during Robert's rebellion, and I've had a few videos already on it. For this video, I'm just going to go over Ned's actions during the war. Getting home was a challenge for Ned, as Gulltown was the Vale's major port, and they had remained loyal to the throne, so Ned had to find another route. He decided to cross the Mountains of the Moon to the Fingers, and there paid a fisherman to take him to White Harbor. But fate rebelled against him, and a storm hit while on the Bight, resulting in the death of the fisherman. Luckily, the fisherman's daughter was able to get Ned to the Three Sisters. Arriving in Sisterton, Lord Borrell was urged by his maester to take Ned's head and hand it over to Aerys II as a show of loyalty. However, the Lord had heard that Lord Arryn and Robert Baratheon had taken Gulltown during Ned's journey, And when his maester said Prince Rhaegar was sure to defeat the rebels, Ned responded, "In this world, only winter is certain. We may lose our heads, it's true. But what if we prevail?" Not knowing who would come out on top in this rebellion, the Lord of Sisterton let Ned go, telling him, "If you lose, you were never here." Finally, Ned was able to get to the north and call his banners. Already missing out on 3 battles, Ned began his march south. As he marched south, his forces would combine with Hoster Tully's, who had joined the side of the rebels with an alliance secured by Ned's betrothal to his eldest daughter, Catelyn Tully, a match that replaced the one between Brandon Stark and Catelyn. The Stark and Tully forces arrived in the Stony Sept and fought a battle that would become known as the Battle of the Bells. Lord Stark and Tully had arrived just in time, with Robert Baratheon being wounded and in hiding. They turned the tide and sent the Loyalists running. The Battle of the Bells was a victory for the rebels. After the battle, Lord Tully arranged for his youngest daughter Lysa to marry Jon Arryn. A double wedding was then held with Catelyn Tully marrying Eddard Stark and Lysa Tully marrying Jon Arryn. Robert Baratheon was present at the wedding, and probably completely obnoxious. Ned stayed with Catelyn for almost a fortnight, resulting in her pregnancy before heading off for the next big battle, the Battle of the Trident. This battle ended with Rhaegar Targaryen dead by Robert's hand. Robert then proclaimed his intent to take the Iron Throne, but being badly injured, he sent Ned to lay siege on King's Landing. Ned arrived with his forces at the city to find that it had already been taken by Tywin Lannister's forces. Ned rode his horse into the throne room to find Jaime Lannister seated on the Iron Throne, Lannister forces around him, and Aerys' corpse on the floor. Ned waited, watching Jaime with his cold gray eyes, judging him, until Jaime laughed and got off the throne. Taking off his helm, he told the Stark, "Have no fear, Stark. I was only keeping it warm for our friend Robert. It's not a very comfortable seat, I'm afraid." Finally, Robert arrived at King's Landing, where Tywin presented the dead bodies of Ilya Martell and her 2 children by the dead Prince Rhaegar to Robert. Robert was pleased, but Ned was outraged, calling it a brutal act and the murder of children. Robert replied he didn't see any babes, only dragon spawn. A fierce argument broke out between the 2 men, and not even Jon Arryn could calm them down. Finally, Ned rode south to finish the war in a cold rage. With his men, Ned headed to Storm's End to lift the Tyrell siege on the castle. On his arrival, Lord Tyrell quickly dipped his banners, and the siege ended. Though Stannis Baratheon, Robert's younger brother, was the one that held out against the siege for the better part of the war, Robert would give the credit and his thanks to Ned. After ending the siege, Ned took 6 companions, Howland Reed, William Dustin, Ethan Glover, Martin Cassell, Theo Wool, and Mark Riswell to the Tower of Joy, a small tower in Dorne where he heard his sister Lyanna was being held. 3 Kingsguard guarded the tower, Gerald Hightower, Oswald Went, and Arthur Dane. In the fight, all 3 of the Kingsguard died, along with all of Ned's companions, but Howland Reed. Ned later claimed that if it wasn't for Howland, Arthur Dane, a man he considered the finest knight he had ever seen, would have killed him. After the battle, Ned headed inside the tower, where he found his sister covered in blood, clutching dead black flower petals. She made her brother promise her something, and as soon as Ned agreed to it, she smiled, squeezed his hand, and died. Ned held her body in silent grief, and Howland would find him, eventually taking his hand from hers. This moment would haunt Ned for the rest of his life. Afterwards, Ned tore down the tower to make markers for the dead. He then rode to Starfall to give Arthur Dane's sword, Dawn, to his sister, Ashara Dane. Later, Robert and Ned would finally reconcile, their grief over the loss of Lyanna bringing the 2 men back together. In the span of 19 short years, Ned had lost his mother, father, older brother, and sister, tore down a dynasty, and helped start a new one. Then he returned north to rule a castle he never felt he was supposed to have. When he returned home, he had a baby named Jon Snow with him, who he claimed to be his bastard. His wife Catelyn had already had their son Robb, and was greatly angered over Ned's bastard sharing their home. Ned would never share Jon's mother's identity, and quickly quieted any rumors about her at Winterfell. He was always very adamant that the child was his blood. At the Godswood, he prayed for Robb and Jon to grow up as brothers, with only love between them, and for his wife to find it in her heart to forgive him. Following Robert's rebellion for 6 years, much like many Lord Starks before him, Ned remained in the north, ruling his territory and having little interest in the south. With his wife, Ned had another 2 children, Sansa born in 286 AC and Arya born in 289 AC, before heading to war once again. The Iron Islands rebelled in 289 AC, and Ned traveled to the islands to end the Greyjoy Rebellion. Robert Baratheon joined him with his other loyal forces, and after forcing Balon Greyjoy to surrender, Ned took Balon's only living son, Theon Greyjoy, a 10-year-old boy, as a hostage and ward. Ned would treat Theon with respect and try to be his father, but Theon, as a boy, would always live in fear of his stern face, and never feel like he was ever truly a Stark. After the war, Ned had 2 more children with his wife, Bran born in 290 AC and Rickon born in 295 AC. By all accounts, Ned was a good father, and his children continued to have good memories of him and his teachings even after he died. His lessons ranged from how to be a good commander, caring for their own weapons, how to behave in battle, or something as simple as teaching Sansa that they can't keep a singer at Winterfell against his will, and they need to let the man travel on, despite her sobs otherwise. Ned continued to be an honorable man, and many considered him a great lord of Winterfell, even though he never felt like he was supposed to rule the North, and that his brother had been meant for it all. Despite feeling inadequate, many have stayed loyal to him, his memory, and his house, even after his death, demonstrating that his insecurities were ghosts that only he could see. From time to time, despite having a mostly quiet region, Ned would have to deal with a lord or keep an eye on 1 or 2, such as Lord Roose Bolton, a man he never trusted. If needed, Ned would condemn a man to death, and as a follower of the old gods, he would always carry out the sentence himself. In one case, when Jorah Mormont, Lord of Bear Island, broke the law by selling poachers to slavers, Ned traveled to Bear Island to deal with him. However, Jorah fled before Ned could get to Bear Island to sentence him to death. Ned also had a plan to deal with the wildlings that constantly threatened the north. He had planned on raising new lords and settling them in the abandoned holdfasts in the Gifts area, close to the wall, to form a shield against the wildlings. Though this plan would have required the Watch to yield back a large part of the gift, Ned's brother Benjen was sure the Lord Commander would agree to it, as long as the new lordlings paid taxes to Castle Black rather than Winterfell. Ned decided that they would continue with the plan after the next winter, as the promise of land would not lure men north until the winter was over. But in 298 AC, Robert Baratheon traveled to Winterfell to ask Ned to become his new Hand of the King, following Jon Arryn's death. Then, A Game of Thrones began again. Thank you for watching, hit the like button, it helps out the channel, and Stark Month continues.